In this video, we will witness the legendary story of the Titanic and the truth behind its sinking. We will experience the moment of impact as if we were inside the ship, look at real images of the iceberg that sank it and the scar it left on the vessel. Then, through a striking experiment, we will understand what those who fell into the water went through and follow the trail of the truth. This sound you hear was a cry for help rising from the Titanic, signals desperately sent in Morse code to other ships. As the ship slowly sank into the icy waters, 25-year-old Jack Phillips was in the telegraph room. He never left his post for a moment until the communication room was flooded. Although that young man fought heroically until the last moment, his efforts would be in vain. The wreck of the Titanic would be found exactly 73 years after it sank, and that's when everything would begin anew. It all started 111 years ago from today, with a major headline in 1912. The Titanic set sail on its maiden voyage. The story of this ship was, in fact, based on a challenge. At that time, the transatlantic passenger trade was an extremely profitable field, with shipping companies competing to carry wealthy travelers and immigrants. Two giant companies in particular were in fierce competition. The White Star Line wanted to answer its rivals' speed records in a different way. Their motto was, "We may not be the fastest, but who wants to cross the ocean feeling sick?" Their goal was not speed, but to offer a level of luxury, comfort, and size never seen before. Their aim was to become the absolute master of the passage between Europe and America within 5 years. With this vision, they established a giant army of workers, mostly Irish, in 1908. First, the massive RMS Olympic was launched. At 45,000 tons, it was the largest the world had ever seen. But the real goal, the apple of their eye, was the next ship, the RMS Titanic. A crowd of 200,000 people gathered to watch the launch of the Titanic, built by the labor of approximately 14,000 workers. Those who saw it felt as if the Earth itself was moving, not the ship. A ship named Masaba, sailing ahead of the Titanic, reported seeing large icebergs on their route. However, this critical warning, although received by Phillips and his assistant in the communication room, was never relayed to the bridge. The operators were busy transmitting personal messages that first-class passengers wanted to send to their relatives in New York. The air suddenly turned ice-cold. It was as if the cold breath of death was hovering around the ship. The sea was as calm as a sheet of glass. As midnight approached, Lookout Frederick Fleet, in the crow's nest, noticed a dark mass ahead of the ship that he couldn't quite make out. It was an iceberg. Fleet rang the ship's alarm bell 3 times and telephoned the bridge. First Officer Murdoch gave the order, "Hard a starboard." Although the ship's speed was only about 40 kilometers per hour, 22 knots, it was now impossible to stop the massive vessel. Just 37 seconds later, at 11:40 p.m., the ship struck the iceberg on its starboard side. The iceberg tore through the ship's hull like a can opener. The rivets below the waterline popped off one by one, and 5 compartments began to fill rapidly with water. Captain Smith summoned the ship's designer, Thomas Andrews, and requested a damage report. When Andrews went below and checked the compartments, his worst fears were realized. The ship was taking on 400 tons of water per minute. It could no longer be saved. The only option was to abandon the ship immediately. The captain announced that women and children would be given priority in the lifeboats. An atmosphere of pure panic now gripped the ship. At this point, it was crucial to call for help. However, the operators in the communication room had been preoccupied with the personal messages of wealthy passengers throughout the voyage and had not given official warnings the attention they deserved. In fact, when the nearby ship, the Californian, reported that it had stopped due to ice and that they should be careful, the Titanic's operator, Phillips, replied, "Shut up! I am busy, I am working." But now, Captain Smith came in person and ordered, "Send for help by wireless, at once." The nearby Californian did not respond to the calls. After a while, the ship Carpathia received the distress call, but it was too far away. It would take at least 4 hours to arrive, yet the Titanic had only 2 hours left. They realized that no help would reach them in time. The ship's bow was completely submerged, and its massive stern began to rise. An officer on the Californian, just 32 kilometers 20 miles away, reported to Captain Lord that he had seen rockets being fired from the Titanic. However, due to the vague maritime regulations of the time, Captain Lord was unsure whether these flares were a distress signal. He ordered his crew to simply keep watch and went back to bed. By 2:15 a.m., the lights of the Titanic had completely disappeared. The crew of the Californian, deaf to the cries for help right next to them all night, had watched hundreds of people die because of an incompetent captain. The Titanic sank completely at 2:20 a.m. With the first light of dawn, the Carpathia arrived in the area and rescued some of the lucky survivors. In these images, taken from a rescue ship, we can clearly see the iceberg that sank the Titanic and the marks from the collision on its surface. But what fate awaited those who managed to stay afloat after the ship sank? In an experiment, a volunteer entered an environment with a water temperature close to that of that night, and his body was monitored with thermal cameras. Within just 20 minutes, his body became as cold as metal, and he faced the risk of hypothermia. Tests conducted after he left the water showed that his manual dexterity had decreased by 60% and his strength by 40%. The grim conclusion of this experiment was this: the survivors who fell from the Titanic into the sea most likely froze to death in excruciating pain within half an hour. So how did the ship take on water so easily? Was it due to the use of cheap materials? In fact, the ship's steel hull was quite strong. The problem, however, lay in the old-fashioned iron rivets that joined the steel plates. The Titanic did not hit the iceberg with a direct blow, but scraped against it. During this scraping motion, the mushroom-shaped heads of the rivets popped off one by one, creating a gash of about 9 meters, 30 feet, in the hull. If the Titanic had hit the iceberg from a different angle, there was a 99% chance it would not have sunk. In reality, everything had aligned for disaster that night. There was no moon in the sky, and the sea was incredibly calm. This created an optical illusion known as a super-refraction, which blurred the horizon and prevented the iceberg from being spotted until it was less than a kilometer away. Even if the lookouts had had binoculars, it might not have changed the outcome, as people first spot things with the naked eye and then use binoculars to examine them. And in a twist of fate, the iceberg that hit the Titanic was a massive 1.5 million ton block formed from snowflakes that had fallen in Greenland thousands of years ago. After a journey lasting months, it was waiting right there at that exact time, directly. The survivors looked back and witnessed what had destroyed them. 1,500 people, mostly men and third-class passengers, lost their lives. Captain Smith, for whom this was to be his last voyage before retirement, was one of them. He retired, not from his profession, but from life itself. People who had been chatting in their rooms, kissing their children goodnight just 3 hours earlier, were now in the depths of the icy waters. Mothers lost their children, fathers lost their families. None of the survivors would ever forget that night. Behind this tragic story of the Titanic, there are actually many more secrets yet to be uncovered. In the next episode, we will take a closer look at the reports on Captain Lord's negligence and other striking experiments. We will examine the real traces of the Titanic's infamous collision with the iceberg and see incredible footage from the wreck. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss this series.